The heavy mahogany doors of the family's study creaked open, revealing a room bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light. Dust motes danced lazily in the sunbeams, suspended in the hush that had settled over the gathering. The air was thick with expectation, charged, and almost suffocating. I stood near the window, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. My name is Evelyn Hart, the youngest daughter of William Hart, a man whose name had once carried the weight of respect, and now, even in death, cast a long, uneasy shadow. Around me, my family shifted in their seats, the hush deepening as the lawyer took his place at the head of the long oak table. Uncle Leonard sat stiffly in the leather chair closest to the fireplace, his lips pressed into a thin line as he drummed his fingers against his knee. My older brother Malcolm was sprawled in his chair, eyes half-lidded with an expression that was equal parts boredom and calculation. His wife Miranda perched beside him, her fingers twisted in the pearl necklace at her throat. The tension was so thick it almost buzzed in my ears. The lawyer, Mr. Whitmore, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming today. As you know, we're here to hear the last will and testament of the late William Hart." I swallowed hard. My father had been a man of secrets and silences, his life a series of closed doors and unfinished sentences. Even in death, he'd managed to draw us all together one last time, forcing us to face each other and the simmering resentments that had festered for years. Mr. Whitmore began to read his voice, a careful monotone that did nothing to soften the impact of each word. He spoke of stocks and properties, of trust funds, and stipulations, each phrase slicing through the room like a blade. Malcolm's eyes lit up as the lawyer read out the bulk of the inheritance property's stocks and the family estate. My brother's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile that made my stomach twist. Miranda's hand found his under the table, her smile just as cold. Then Mr. Whitmore paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He cleared his throat again. "To Evelyn Hart," he said, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "My youngest daughter. I leave the lake cottage and a trust fund of modest size to be used at her discretion." A silence settled, heavy and suffocating. I felt the eyes on me, pity from some, contempt from others. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. The lake cottage, my childhood refuge, the one place where I'd felt truly at peace. It wasn't nothing, but compared to the vast wealth my father had left to Malcolm, it felt like a deliberate slight. Malcolm's voice broke the silence. "Is that all?" he asked, his tone light, but edged with something sharp. Mr. Whitmore nodded. "That is all, Mr. Hart." I could see the smirk playing at the corner of Malcolm's mouth. "Well," he drawled, leaning back in his chair, "I suppose father knew where real strength lies." Miranda let out a soft laugh, her hand smoothing down the front of her silk blouse. "Indeed. Best not to burden Evelyn with responsibilities she can't handle." The words stung, but I kept my chin high. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. I'd learned long ago that silence could be as powerful as any retort. The meeting dissolved after that, chairs scraping back, and voices rising as the others began to chatter in low, excited tones. Deals were already being struck in whispers, alliances formed and broken before my eyes. I lingered by the window, staring out at the garden beyond. The roses were in bloom, their bright petals a riot of color against the neat hedges. My father had loved that garden, he'd once told me, that tending to it had given him a sense of peace he never found anywhere else. A shadow fell across my shoulder. I turned to see Malcolm standing there, his hands in his pockets, and that smug smile still on his face. "You didn't really expect more, did you?" he asked softly, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I didn't expect anything," I said calmly, though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. He laughed low and amused. "Good! Because you're not getting it. You were always the soft one, Evelyn. The dreamer. Father knew that. That's why he left you a cottage and left the rest to me." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. Maybe, or maybe he knew I wouldn't turn this into a battlefield. Malcolm's eyes narrowed the smile, fading just a fraction. Don't be naive. Everything's a battlefield. And if you're not fighting, you're losing. He turned and walked away, leaving me staring after him, my fists clenched at my sides. In that moment, I realized something I'd never dared to admit before. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about power, about control, and Malcolm was already drawing his lines in the sand. As the room emptied around me, I took a deep breath, feeling something harden in my chest. I thought of the lake cottage, my sanctuary, and the modest trust fund that was supposed to be my consolation prize. I thought of the cold triumph in Malcolm's eyes, and the way Miranda had looked at me like I was nothing. They thought I would fade into the background, accept my small share, and disappear. But they were wrong. Because the lake cottage was more than a piece of property, it was a symbol of everything my father had left me. And I wouldn't let it be taken from me. Not by Malcolm, not by anyone. As I turned to leave the study, I felt the first stirrings of something fierce and resolute in my chest. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let this be the end of my story. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but there was no warmth in the sun as it streamed through the high windows of the estate's grand hall. I could feel the shift in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the battles to begin. I found myself drifting through the halls in a daze, my mind replaying every word from the will reading the day before. My father's voice echoed in my head, even though he was long gone. The lake cottage and a modest trust. It was a kindness I knew, but also a message, a challenge maybe, or a final chance to stand on my own. Downstairs, the family had already begun to gather for a breakfast that felt more like a strategic summit. The long dining table was set with gleaming silver and fine china, but no one seemed interested in the food. Malcolm held court at the head of the table, his voice low and confident as he spoke with Uncle Leonard. "I'm telling you, Uncle, it's only right," Malcolm was saying, his tone smooth and practiced. "Father wanted me to handle the estate. Evelyn never had the stomach for it. She's too gentle for this sort of thing." I paused in the doorway, my breath catching. He said it so casually, as if it were a foregone conclusion. I could see Leonard nodding along his eyes, darting to me with a flicker of something I couldn't read. Was it doubt, sympathy, or just a reflection of his own ambition? Miranda sat beside Malcolm, her fingers wrapped around a delicate teacup. She didn't say much, but her smile was all I needed to see. She was enjoying this, enjoying the way Malcolm wove his words, shaping the narrative around him, like a tailor cutting cloth. I forced my feet to move, crossing to the table and taking a seat at the far end. My hands trembled as I poured myself a cup of tea, the clink of the spoon against the porcelain, sounding far too loud in the hush of the room. Malcolm's eyes flicked to me, a brief, cool glance that dismissed me as quickly as it had acknowledged me. "Morning, Evelyn," he said lightly. "I trust you slept well." I met his gaze, refusing to look away. "Well enough," I said, my voice calm. "And you, better than expected," he replied, his smile widening just a fraction. "There's a lot to be done, of course. Father left quite a mess behind." I said nothing. There was no point in arguing, not yet. But I watched him closely, the way he leaned in to speak to Uncle Leonard, the way Miranda's laughter slid like silk through the air. They were building alliances, making plans, and I was the loose thread they thought they could snip away without a second thought. After breakfast, I slipped away to the small sitting room that overlooked the garden. The lake cottage was only a short drive from here, but it felt like another world entirely. I could almost see the water in my mind, calm and endless, a place that had always felt like mine. I thought about my father's choice. Why had he given me the cottage? Why had he trusted me with that place, and not the grand estate or the endless investments? A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see Lena, the housekeeper's daughter, hovering in the doorway. She was younger than me by a few years, her hair tied back in a neat braid. "Miss Evelyn," she said, her voice low, I heard them talking in the study this morning. Mr. Malcolm and Mr. Leonard. They're already talking about selling the cottage. They said you'd be better off with the money." I felt my heart stutter. "Selling it, but it's mine." Lena looked away, her hands twisting in her apron. I thought you should know, she said softly. I didn't want you to be surprised. I nodded, my mind racing. Thank you, Lena. Truly. She gave me a small smile and slipped away, leaving me alone with the weight of what she'd told me. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. Malcolm had always believed that money was power, that whoever held the purse strings held the world. And now he was already reaching for what little I had left. I stood there for a long time, my fingers curled into the fabric of my dress. My father's words echoed in my mind, words he'd said to me when I was just a girl. Strength isn't always loud, Evelyn. Sometimes it's the quietest voice that holds the most power. I didn't feel strong. I felt small and alone, a single flickering candle in the dark. But I wasn't ready to let them snuff me out. That afternoon, I went to the library, the one place in the house that still felt untouched by Malcolm's schemes. I pulled down books on property law and inheritance rights, my mind buzzing with half-formed plans. I didn't know how to fight Malcolm and Uncle Leonard, but I knew I had to try. As I sat there, the scent of old paper and dust surrounding me, I felt a spark of something deep in my chest, something fierce and determined. They thought I would roll over and let them take everything. They thought I was too soft, too gentle. They didn't know me at all. When I left the library, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. I paused in the doorway, letting the light warm my face. I thought about the lake cottage, about the quiet peace of the water, and the way the wind whispered through the pines. It was mine, and I would fight for it. As I walked back through the halls, I felt their eyes on me, curious, assessing. Let them watch, let them wonder. Because the battle for my father's legacy was just beginning, and I was no longer afraid to take up arms. The next few days unfolded like a silent dance, each step measured and precise. Malcolm moved through the house with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won his voice, low and soothing, as he spoke to Uncle Leonard and the family lawyer. The others watched him with wary respect, but I could see the calculation in their eyes, the quiet question, which side am I on? I kept to myself, but I listened. Every whispered conversation, every sideways glance, it was all part of a web I was only beginning to understand. One evening, I found myself alone in the library, the golden lamplight pooling around me as I read over old ledgers and letters. My father's neat looping handwriting felt like a message from beyond the grave hints of decisions he'd made and the reasons he'd never shared. The door opened quietly, and I looked up to find Daniel standing there. He was one of my father's oldest friends and had always been kind to me, his sharp eyes softening whenever I entered the room. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice low. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He sat down slowly, his gaze thoughtful, as he studied my face. "You're your father's daughter," he said after a moment. "I see it now." The quiet determination. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I'm just trying to understand what he wanted," I said finally. Daniel nodded. "And what do you think that is?" I hesitated. "I think he wanted me to stand on my own, to fight for what matters." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's more than most would see," he said. "Your father was a complicated man, Evelyn. He didn't trust easily, but he loved fiercely in his own way. Don't forget that." His words felt like a balm, soothing the ache I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I'd spent so long doubting myself, doubting whether I even had a place in this family anymore. "Thank you, Daniel," I said softly. He nodded, his expression growing serious. "Be careful, Evelyn. Malcolm, he's not the type to accept a challenge lightly, and he won't fight fair." "I know," I said, and I meant it. When he left, I sat for a long time in the quiet, the flickering lamplight casting shadows across the walls. My father's library had always been a place of comfort, a refuge from the storm of family politics. Now it felt like a war room, and I was the last line of defense. The next morning, I woke to find the house already buzzing. Malcolm had called a meeting in the drawing room, a family discussion he called it, but I could hear the thinly veiled threat in his tone. I took my time getting ready, brushing my hair back, and choosing a simple dress. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I wanted to look like myself. When I entered the drawing room, the tension was palpable. Malcolm sat in the armchair near the fireplace, Miranda at his side. Uncle Leonard stood by the window, his arms crossed over his chest. Evelyn, Malcolm said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for joining us." I sat down calmly, my hands folded in my lap. "What is this about?" He leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "We've been talking, and we think it's best if we start discussing how to streamline the estate. There's a lot to manage, and it would be easier if everything was consolidated under one name." I raised an eyebrow. "And by everything, you mean the lake cottage as well?" He didn't even blink. "Of course. It's just practical. We could sell it, invest the money back into the estate. You'd be well compensated, of course." Miranda's smile was sickly sweet. "It's what Father would have wanted, Evelyn, for the family to be united." I felt my jaw tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Funny," I said softly. "I don't remember Father ever saying that to me. In fact, he left the cottage to me specifically. I won't sell it." The room fell silent. Malcolm's eyes darkened, and for a moment I saw the mask slip. "Don't be foolish, Evelyn," he said coldly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making this hard," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just not going to let you take what doesn't belong to you." Uncle Leonard shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking between us. "Perhaps we should know." Malcolm snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "She needs to understand that this isn't about her feelings. It's about what's best for the family." I stood slowly, my heart pounding. "I won't sell," I said again, each word a promise. "And I won't let you bully me into giving up what Father left me." For a moment, Malcolm just stared at me, his jaw tight. Then he leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Very well," he said softly. "If that's how you want it." I didn't trust the calm in his voice, but I didn't let it stop me. As I left the room, I heard Miranda's soft laugh behind me, like the hiss of a snake in the grass. That evening, I sat in the garden, the cool night air brushing against my skin. The stars above seemed impossibly bright, their cold light a reminder of how small we all were in the grand scheme of things. I knew I couldn't fight Malcolm alone. He had Uncle Leonard, Miranda, and half the family in his pocket. But I also knew I didn't have to fight him alone. Daniel's words echoed in my mind. He won't fight fair. I wouldn't either. And so, as the night deepened around me, I made a silent vow to the memory of my father, and to the quiet strength that ran in my blood. I would not be moved. The next morning, the world outside was deceptively peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the carpet, but it felt like a lie. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, as if it too knew what was coming. I sat at the small table in the breakfast room, stirring my tea slowly. My thoughts were a tangled mess of doubt and resolve. Malcolm's warning from the day before still echoed in my ears, and I could almost feel the weight of his gaze, even though he wasn't in the room. I didn't have to wait long to see his next move. Miranda breezed in, her hair perfectly arranged and a bright smile plastered on her face. She moved with the kind of grace that made people believe she had nothing to hide. But I'd seen the glint in her eyes, the way she always managed to be where Malcolm needed her most. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "I thought I'd find you here." I looked up, my expression neutral. "Morning, Miranda." She poured herself a cup of coffee, the faint clink of the porcelain almost musical. "You know," she began almost offhand, "I've been thinking a lot about what Malcolm said yesterday. About the cottage." I stiffened but kept my voice calm. "I told him I'm not selling." She let out a soft laugh. "Of course, I know how stubborn you can be." She set her cup down carefully, her fingers tracing the delicate pattern on the rim. "But I worry about you, Evelyn. About how difficult this is going to be for you if you keep fighting." I narrowed my eyes. "Is that a threat?" Miranda's smile didn't falter. "Not at all. Just advice. You know how these things go. Family disputes have a way of getting messy." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you'd like, I could speak to Malcolm for you. Maybe find a way to smooth things over. I swallowed the taste of bitterness sharp on my tongue. Thank you, I said coolly, but I can fight my own battles. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, frustration maybe, or anger. But she quickly masked it with another bright smile. Suit yourself, she said lightly. Just remember, family should stick together. She left me sitting there, her words hanging in the air like smoke. I knew what she was really saying, fall in line or be crushed. I spent the rest of the morning in the library, my father's old journals spread out in front of me. The smell of leather and old paper was comforting, a reminder that there was still something in this house that was mine. As I turned the pages, I found notes he'd written in the margins, small, thoughtful comments about the land, the family, the future he'd imagined. But there were no answers, no easy solutions. That afternoon, I heard raised voices in the hallway. I slipped out of the library, my pulse quickening, as I followed the sound to the study. The door was ajar, and I paused just outside listening. It's not enough, Malcolm was saying, his voice tight. She's not going to back down. Uncle Leonard's voice was lower, almost pleading. Malcolm, think about this. If you push too hard, it'll turn the rest of the family against you. They're already nervous. She's just one person, Malcolm snapped. One person who's making this more difficult than it needs to be. I won't let her ruin everything Father built. She's still your sister, Leonard said softly. Malcolm's answer was a low, cold laugh. She's an obstacle, nothing more. I felt the breath leave my lungs in a rush. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. I'd known Malcolm was ruthless, but hearing him say it so plainly, he didn't see me as family. He saw me as an enemy. I fled to the garden, the cool air stinging my cheeks as I tried to steady my breathing. The roses were in full bloom, their sweet scent a sharp contrast to the poison in my brother's words. As I stood there, trying to calm the shaking in my hands, a soft voice broke through my thoughts. Evelyn, I turned to see Lena standing there, worry etched in her young face. Are you all right? I forced a smile. I'm fine, I lied. Just needed some air. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I heard them talking earlier, she said quietly. Mr. Malcolm and Mrs. Miranda. They're planning something about the cottage. My stomach twisted. What did they say? She bit her lip. I'm not sure. But I heard them mention a buyer, someone who'd pay a lot under the table. A chill ran through me. They're trying to sell it behind my back, I whispered. Lena nodded. I thought you should know. Thank you, I said, my voice shaking. I won't forget this. As she walked away, I felt a steely resolve settle over me. They could lie and manipulate all they wanted, but I wasn't going to let them steal what was mine. That night, I stayed up late in my room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I went over every conversation, every glance, trying to piece together their plans. My father's words echoed in my mind. Strength isn't always loud. I would find a way to fight back, not with threats or bluster, but with the quiet certainty that comes from knowing you're right. As I closed my journal and turned off the lamp, I felt a flicker of something like hope. I wasn't alone, not completely. There were still people who believed in me. People like Daniel, people like Lena. And in the end, that was all I needed. I lay in the darkness, listening to the soft creak of the old house around me. Malcolm thought he could break me, that he could bend me to his will with threats and half-truths. But he was wrong, because this was my home, my fight, and I wasn't going to lose. The next morning dawned gray and somber, a thin mist curling around the old stone walls of the estate. I woke with a heaviness in my chest, the words I'd overheard the day before replaying in my mind. Malcolm and Miranda's betrayal wasn't just a threat anymore. It was real. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, but beneath the fatigue, there was a glint of something harder, determination. They thought I would just let them take what they wanted. They didn't know me at all. I made my way down to the kitchen, where Lena was already at work, her hands dusted with flour. She looked up as I entered, her expression cautious. "Morning, Miss Evelyn," she said softly. Good morning, Lena, I replied. Did you hear anything more? She hesitated, then shook her head. They're being careful, but I know they're planning something. I nodded, my mind already racing. Thank you, Lena, for everything. She gave me a small smile, but her eyes were worried. Just be careful. They won't like it if they think you're getting in their way. I forced a smile. I will. After breakfast, I retreated to my father's study. It was a room steeped in his presence, dark wood shelves, of old books, the scent of tobacco lingering in the air. I ran my fingers over the spines of the books, feeling the weight of the past pressing in around me. I knew there had to be something here, some clue to why my father had left the cottage to me and not to Malcolm. Something that would prove he'd trusted me, even if no one else did. I pulled down the ledgers one by one, scanning the neat columns of numbers and the careful notes in the margins. At first, it all seemed like a jumble of investments and property values, nothing that made sense to me. But as I looked closer, patterns began to emerge, small inconsistencies, numbers that didn't add up. And then I found it. Tucked between 2 pages of a ledger was a letter, the paper yellowed and brittle with age. My hands shook as I unfolded it, my father's familiar scrawl filling the page. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means you're searching for answers. I hope you'll understand why I did what I did. The cottage was always meant for you. It's the only place I ever found peace, and I wanted you to have that too. Don't let them take it from you. You're stronger than you know. Love, Father. Tears stung my eyes as I read the words over and over. My father had known. He'd known what Malcolm was capable of, known that I would have to fight for what was mine. I tucked the letter into my pocket, my fingers brushing over the faded ink like a promise. I wouldn't let Malcolm erase my father's wishes. I wouldn't let him erase me. I left the study and made my way to the garden, needing the fresh air to clear my head. The roses were beginning to fade their petals, curling in the early autumn chill. I thought of the cottage, of the quiet peace of the lake, and felt a surge of determination. As I turned to go back inside, I nearly collided with Daniel. Evelyn, he said, his brow furrowing as he took in my expression. Are you all right? I hesitated, then pulled out the letter, handing it to him without a word. He read it quickly, his eyes widening. He trusted you, he said quietly, handing it back. He wanted you to fight for this. I know, I said. But Malcolm, he won't stop. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he can't win. He hesitated, then leaned closer. I've been keeping my own notes, he said in a low voice. I've seen how Malcolm's been manipulating the estate's accounts. If we can prove it, my breath caught. You have evidence. He nodded. Not enough yet. But if we work together, we can find it. Hope flared in my chest, bright and sharp. Then let's do it, I said fiercely, before he can sell the cottage out from under me. For the rest of the day, we worked side by side in the study, combing through the ledgers and files, piecing together the truth, one fragment at a time. It felt like breathing again, like I was no longer fighting alone. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Daniel looked up from the papers, his expression thoughtful. You know, he said slowly, your father once told me that the greatest battles are the ones fought with quiet resolve. I met his gaze and felt a small, determined smile curve my lips. Then let's be quiet, warriors. That night, as I lay in bed, I let my mind replay the day's discoveries. My father's letter burned in my memory, a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for a cottage. I was fighting for the right to stand in the world and claim my own space. I thought of Malcolm and Miranda, of the way they moved through the house like they owned it already. But they didn't own me. They never would. As sleep finally claimed me, I felt a sense of calm settle over me, a calm born not from ignorance, but from the knowledge that I had the strength to fight back. Tomorrow I would keep digging, I would keep pushing, and I would show them all that I wasn't the quiet girl they thought I was, because I was my father's daughter. And I was ready to finish what he started. The day of the family meeting dawned cold and brittle, the kind of day that makes you pull your coat tighter around your shoulders. The crisp air felt like a promise, or maybe a warning, and I braced myself for what was to come. I knew Malcolm wouldn't let this go. Not after what he'd said in the drawing room, not after the way I'd refused to back down. He was gathering the others, weaving his web of alliances and lies, and I was determined to see it for what it was. By mid-morning, the family had gathered in the grand dining room. The heavy curtains were pulled back, the room flooded with winter light that did nothing to warm the tension crackling in the air. I took a seat near the end of the table, my father's letter tucked safely in my pocket like a talisman. Malcolm sat at the head, Miranda at his side, their faces carefully composed. Uncle Leonard lingered near the window, his expression unreadable. Malcolm cleared his throat, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I know this has been a difficult time for everyone, but it's important we're all on the same page." I watched him carefully, noting the faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He was enjoying this, the chance to play the benevolent leader, the man in charge. He turned his gaze to me, his smile sharpening. "Evelyn," he said, "I know you've had concerns about the cottage, and I want you to know that we're only trying to do what's best for the family." I held his gaze, my voice steady. "The best for the family, or the best for you?" A flicker of irritation crossed his face, but he smoothed it away quickly. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "I'm here to make a proposal, a way for everyone to walk away satisfied." He glanced at Miranda, who gave a small nod. "We've had an offer," he continued. "A generous one. If we sell the cottage, we can reinvest the money, ensure the estate stays strong for generations." My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to keep my voice calm. "It's not for sale, Malcolm. It was Father's gift to me." Miranda's smile was thin, her voice silky. "Evelyn, don't be so emotional. This isn't about sentiment. It's about what's practical." I looked around the table at the faces that wouldn't meet my eyes. Some looked away out of discomfort. Others watched with thinly veiled interest, waiting to see who would win. "Practical," I echoed softly. "Or convenient for you." A low murmur of tension rippled around the room. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "Enough," he said sharply. "I'm trying to be reasonable, Evelyn. Don't mistake that for weakness." I leaned forward, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "I don't want your money," I said. "I want what's mine. And I'm not going to let you take it from me." For a moment, the room was utterly silent. Then Uncle Leonard spoke, his voice low and uneasy. Perhaps Malcolm cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No. She needs to understand that this isn't just about her. She's putting the whole family at risk by refusing to cooperate." I felt a flash of heat in my chest. "The only risk here is letting you dictate everything I said," quietly. "Father trusted me with the cottage. I won't let you erase that." Malcolm's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. "If you won't see reason, I'll have to take it to court. And believe me, Evelyn, I'll win." The threat hung in the air like a thundercloud, but I didn't flinch. "Do what you have to," I said, my voice as cold and steady as the winter light streaming through the windows. "I'll be ready." For a moment, I thought he might say more. But then he pushed back his chair, the scrape of wood on wood loud in the silence. "Very well," he said coolly. "If that's how you want it." The meeting dissolved into uneasy murmurs, family members drifting out in twos and threes, casting glances over their shoulders at me. I stayed where I was, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding, but my resolve like steel. Lena found me later in the hallway, her eyes wide. "Are you all right?" she whispered. I managed a small smile. "I will be," I said. "He wants me to be afraid, but I won't give him that." She nodded, her small hand brushing mine. "I'll help you whatever you need." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. "I'm going to need it." That night, I sat in the library with Daniel, the two of us poring over the estate documents, searching for anything that could strengthen my claim. My father's letter lay on the table between us, a quiet testament to the man he'd been. Daniel looked up from a stack of papers, his expression grim. "He's going to push this as far as he can," he said. "You know that, right?" I know, I said. "But I'm not going to let him bully me into giving up." He reached across the table, his hand closing over mine. Then neither will I, he said softly. You're not alone in this. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of something like hope. Maybe it was fragile, but it was there. As I lay in bed that night, the house quiet around me, I thought about the meeting, about the cold certainty in Malcolm's eyes, and the quiet support I'd found in Daniel and Lena. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew Malcolm would fight me with everything he had. But I also knew that I wouldn't back down. Because this was more than just a cottage. It was a piece of my father's legacy and my own. And I would fight for it with every breath in my body. The days that followed the family meeting felt like living in a pressure cooker. Every conversation was laced with tension, every polite smile a mask for something darker underneath. Malcolm was everywhere, his presence coiling around the estate like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. I spent my days in the library, my father's letter never far from reach. Daniel and I worked side by side, poring over documents, searching for anything that would keep Malcolm from twisting my father's last wishes into something that served only him. One morning, as I traced my fingers over the faded ink of my father's signature on an old deed, a voice broke the silence. "You're up early," Daniel said softly, slipping into the room with a mug of coffee in hand. I looked up and managed a tired smile. Couldn't sleep. He set the mug down in front of me, his eyes gentle. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I know, but I have to see it through." He nodded, his hand brushing mine briefly. "We'll find something, Evelyn. We just have to keep digging." I took a sip of the coffee, its warmth grounding me. "I know." And so we kept searching, the hours slipping by in a haze of paper and ink. But for all our effort, nothing seemed to stick, no hidden clause, no loophole to protect me from Malcolm's relentless push. By late afternoon, my head was pounding. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment. That's when I heard it, a soft rustle, a whisper of movement from the hallway beyond. I looked up, frowning. "Did you hear that?" Daniel's brow furrowed. What I stood and moved toward the door, the sound growing clearer as I approached, a soft, hesitant voice. I pushed the door open just a crack and saw Lena, her face pale, her hands wringing the edge of her apron. "Lena!" I called softly. She looked up, startled. "Miss Evelyn!" she whispered. I need to show you something." I stepped into the hall, my heart thudding in my chest. "What is it?" She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure we were alone. "I was cleaning in the East Wing," she said in a rush. "And I found something you need to see." I exchanged a glance with Daniel, who stood at my side now, his expression sharpening. "Show us," I said. Lena led us through the quiet corridors, her steps quick and nervous. She stopped outside a small, rarely used sitting room, her hand trembling as she pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale, the heavy drapes drawn tight against the fading light. But there, on the desk by the window, lay a stack of papers that had no business being here. I stepped closer, my breath catching, as I recognized the handwriting. It was Malcolm's. Pages of notes, contracts, and letters, some with my father's signature forged at the bottom. Daniel picked up a page, his eyes scanning it quickly. He's been planning this for months," he said, his voice tight. "Trying to sell the cottage, using your father's name to make it look legitimate." My hands shook as I reached for the papers. "He forged father's signature," I whispered. Lena nodded, her eyes wide. I think he was meeting with someone, a buyer. They're supposed to come soon." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We need to get these to Kara at HR. If Malcolm's forging documents, that's not just manipulation, that's criminal." I nodded, my mind racing. "We have to move quickly," I said. "If he realizes we found this, he'll bury it." Daniel finished, his voice grim. I looked at Lena, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you, Lena. You don't know what this means." She gave me a small, frightened smile. I wanted to help. You've always been kind to me." I squeezed her hand. "You did more than help. You saved me." We gathered the papers quickly, careful to leave the room as we'd found it. As we walked back to the library, My mind was already racing ahead. Malcolm thought he could outmaneuver me, that he could hide his betrayal behind a charming smile and a well-timed lie. But he'd made a mistake. He'd left proof. That evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon, I sat in the library with Daniel and Lena, the papers spread out before us like a map of treachery. We worked in near silence, each of us focused and determined. "This changes everything," Daniel said, finally, his voice low. "He can't talk his way out of this." I nodded my fingers, brushing over the forged signature again and again. "No more lies," I said. "No more shadows." Lena's eyes were bright fierce, in a way I hadn't seen before. "What will you do?" I looked at her, my voice steady. "I'm going to confront him, and I'm going to show him that he can't steal what doesn't belong to him." Daniel's hand found mine, a silent promise of support. "And I'll be right there with you." As I lay in bed that night, the papers hidden safely away, I felt a calm settle over me. This was the turning point, the moment everything shifted. I'd spent so long feeling like I was one step behind, like I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. But now I had the truth. And that was more powerful than any lie Malcolm could tell. Tomorrow I would confront him. Tomorrow I would show him who I really was. The next morning, the estate felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. The tension was thick enough to taste a bitterness on the air that clung to my skin as I dressed in the soft light of dawn. I slipped the folder of forged papers into my satchel, my hands trembling just slightly. Today was the day. Today I would face Malcolm. Downstairs, the house was quiet. I could hear the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the low murmur of voices that hushed when I entered the hall. They all knew, or at least they could sense that something was coming. Daniel met me near the library, his face pale but resolute. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked softly. I nodded, my jaw set. "It has to be me. He needs to see that I'm not afraid of him." He hesitated, then gave a small, grim smile. "Then, let's make sure he knows exactly who he's dealing with." We found Malcolm in the study, his back to us, as he poured himself a drink from the decanter on the sideboard. The clink of glass against crystal was loud in the hush of the room. "Malcolm," I said, my voice calm and steady. He turned his smile slow and mocking. "Evelyn, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I took a deep breath and set the folder down on the desk between us. "We need to talk." His eyes flicked to the folder, then back to my face. "And what's this?" I met his gaze squarely. "Proof," I said. "Proof that you've been forging Father's signature. Proof that you're trying to steal what doesn't belong to you." For a heartbeat, his expression didn't change. Then his smile slipped just a fraction. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said smoothly, but I could hear the tightness in his voice. "Don't lie to me, Malcolm," I said, my voice rising. "I know everything. I know about the secret meetings, the false documents, the buyer you're planning to sell to behind my back." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're grasping at shadows, Evelyn," he said. "You always have been." Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. "We have the documents, Malcolm. The signatures are clear forgeries. We've already spoken to Kara in HR. You can't hide this." Malcolm's eyes snapped to Daniel, a flash of fury there that he didn't bother to hide. "Stay out of this," he snarled. But Daniel didn't flinch. "No. This ends now." I reached for the folder, flipping it open and laying the pages out in front of him. "Look at them," I said, my voice low and hard. "Look at what you've done." For a moment, he just stared at the papers, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. Then he looked up at me, his eyes cold. "You think this will change anything?" he asked softly. "You think you can just waltz in here and take back what's mine? It's not yours," I said, my voice shaking with the force of the words. "It was never yours." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "You don't understand, Evelyn. This estate, it's everything. It's power, it's legacy. Father knew that. That's why he left it to me." I shook my head. "No. He left it to you because he thought you'd protect it. But you're tearing it apart." He let out a breath, his eyes narrowing. "You're naive if you think anyone will side with you. They all know how this works. They'll follow the money. Not everyone, I said quietly. Not Lena. Not Daniel. And not me. For a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw the desperation there, raw and ugly. But then he smiled again, slow and deliberate. "You're making a mistake," he said softly. "You're turning this into a war you can't win." I drew in a breath, my hands steady. Then let it be a war. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, he straightened his expression, shuddering. "Very well," he said. "If that's how you want to play it, so be it." As he turned and walked out of the room, I let out a slow breath, my knees almost giving out beneath me. Daniel caught my arm, his grip grounding me. "You were incredible," he said quietly. He didn't see that coming. "I'm not sure I did either," I admitted, my voice shaking with the adrenaline that still thrummed through my veins. We spent the rest of the day gathering everything we could, every letter, every document that proved Malcolm's betrayal. Lena helped her small hands, quick and sure, as she moved through the house with quiet determination. By nightfall, we had a stack of evidence as thick as my arm. We took it to Kara, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. This is enough," she said finally, her voice hushed. "We'll have to bring in the lawyers, but you've done it, Evelyn. You've exposed him." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the stars bright above me, I felt something loosen in my chest. I wasn't naive anymore. I wasn't the quiet girl in the corner. I was my father's daughter. And I'd just shown Malcolm that I wasn't afraid of him. But even as I stood there, my breath misting in the cold air, I knew this wasn't over. The real fight was just beginning. The morning after my confrontation with Malcolm dawned cold and silent. I woke with a tightness in my chest, the echoes of our words still ringing in my ears. I had shown him I wouldn't be silenced, but I knew the battle was far from over. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress that made me feel grounded. As I fastened the small pearl earrings my mother had given me, I thought of her calm strength, the quiet dignity she had carried, even when the world tried to push her down. I clung to that memory like a lifeline. Downstairs, the house was unusually quiet. I found Lena in the kitchen, her hands buried in a mound of dough. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes wide with worry. "Miss Evelyn," she said softly, Are you all right?" I managed a small smile. "I'm fine, Lena. Or, as fine as I can be right now." She wiped her hands on her apron, her expression grave. "I heard about what happened yesterday. People are talking. Let them talk," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done hiding." She nodded, her small shoulders straightening. "I'm with you," she said quietly. "Whatever happens." Her words settled around me like a warm cloak. I wasn't alone, not anymore. I made my way to the study, my father's old room, now feeling more like a fortress than a sanctuary. Daniel was already there, his brow furrowed as he scanned another stack of documents. "Morning," I said softly, sinking into the chair across from him. "Morning," he replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "Kara called. She's bringing in the estate lawyer this afternoon. She wants us to be ready." I nodded, feeling a surge of nerves in my stomach. "I'll be ready," I said. "We all will." We spent the next few hours gathering every last piece of evidence, checking and double-checking the documents, until our eyes burned. With every page we added to the growing pile, I felt my resolve sharpen. Malcolm had built his power on secrets and manipulation, but now the truth was out in the open, and it was stronger than any of his lies. Around midday, I stepped out into the hallway to clear my head. I found Uncle Leonard standing near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, as he stared out at the frost-touched garden. "Uncle," I said cautiously. He turned to me, his eyes tired but searching. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I wanted to speak with you." I waited, my heart thudding. He hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "Your father. He always believed in you," he said. "He saw something in you that the rest of us overlooked." I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said softly. Leonard's gaze shifted back to the garden. "I've made mistakes," he said. "I let Malcolm lead me down a path I shouldn't have followed. I thought, I thought it was easier to keep the peace than to stand up for what was right." "It's not too late," I said. "We can still fix this. We can still protect what Father wanted." He met my gaze, and for the first time, I saw the guilt there, raw and unguarded. "You're right," he said. "And I'll stand with you, whatever happens next." His words felt like a crack in the walls Malcolm had built around us, a sign that not everyone had been lost to his lies. Later that afternoon, the estate lawyer arrived, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes and a brisk manner. She spread the documents out on the table, her expression growing graver with every page she turned. "This is damning," she said finally, her voice clipped. "Forgery fraud, this isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's a legal matter." Daniel and I exchanged a glance. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. She closed the folder, her eyes steady on mine. "We'll file the papers to challenge Malcolm's claim. It will take time, and he'll fight us every step of the way. But you have a solid case, Evelyn." I drew in a shaky breath, feeling both relief and fear twisting in my chest. "Thank you," I said. As the lawyer packed up her things and left the house, felt strangely still. I wandered through the halls, the portraits of ancestors watching me with solemn eyes. I wondered what they would think of this, of the battles being waged within these walls. As I turned a corner, I nearly collided with Miranda. She looked me up and down, her eyes, cool and assessing. "So this is what it's come to," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Dragging the family name through the mud." "This family was already drowning in mud," I said evenly. "I'm just bringing it into the light." Her lips curled into a sneer. "You're playing a dangerous game, Evelyn. Don't think Malcolm will just roll over and accept this." "I don't expect him to," I said quietly. "But I'm not afraid of him anymore." For a moment she looked like she might argue, but then she simply turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. That evening, I stood in the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon, the chill of the coming night brushing against my skin. Daniel joined me, his hand slipping into mine. "You're incredible, you know that," he said softly. I leaned my head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his quiet support. "I don't feel incredible," I admitted. "I feel scared, but I can't let him win." He kissed the top of my head. "And you won't," he said firmly, "because you're fighting for the truth, and the truth always finds a way." As the stars began to twinkle above us, I closed my eyes and let the moment wash over me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what battles we'd still have to fight. But I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't stop. Not until Malcolm's lies were stripped away, and the truth, my truth, stood in the light for everyone to see. The next morning, the estate was buzzing with an energy that felt electric, charged, dangerous, alive. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in this house. People spoke in hushed tones, eyes darting from me to Malcolm and back again. I felt it in every glance, every whisper, the shift that had taken place. The quiet power I had carried for so long, hidden, uncertain, was no longer invisible. And Malcolm knew it. At breakfast, he sat across from me at the long dining table, his expression calm, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the faint flush on his neck. Miranda sat beside him, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, no one spoke. The clink of silverware was the only sound, a rhythm that felt almost ominous. Finally, Malcolm set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. So he said softly, his voice almost lazy, "You've decided to make this official." I met his gaze, my chin lifting. "I didn't decide anything," I said. "You did. When you started forging Father's signature, when you tried to sell the cottage behind my back." A faint smile ghosted across his lips. "I was trying to protect the estate." "You're too sentimental, Evelyn. You don't understand what it means to run something like this." "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm not like you. I never will be." A muscle twitched in his jaw, but he didn't respond. Instead, he pushed back his chair and stood, his movements deliberate. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low. You think you're stronger than you are. I held his gaze unflinching. And you think I'm weaker than I am. That's your mistake. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away, Miranda trailing behind him without a word. The silence that followed was thick, a promise of battles yet to come. After breakfast, I found Daniel waiting for me in the library. His face was tense, his brow furrowed. He's going to fight this, he said. He'll drag it out as long as he can. I know, I said, but I'm ready. He gave me a long look, then reached out and took my hand. You're not alone in this, Evelyn. Remember that. His words settled in my chest, like an anchor steadying me. I know, I said softly. Thank you. We spent the rest of the morning with Kara and the estate lawyer, preparing the formal challenge. The lawyer was all business, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she laid out the process. This won't be quick, she said. But you have the evidence, and you have the truth. That's more than enough to start. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. I'm ready, I said. Whatever it takes. As the day wore on, the tension in the house grew thicker, the air crackling with things unsaid. I saw it in the way the staff moved their eyes, wary and uncertain. I saw it in the glances the family exchanged, some sympathetic, some cold, all of them waiting to see who would come out on top. That afternoon, I retreated to the garden, needing a moment of quiet. The frost had begun to melt in the pale winter sun, the roses drooping under the weight of it. I ran my fingers over the petals, feeling their cold softness. You're not going to let him win, are you? I turned to see Uncle Leonard standing a few paces away, his hands clasped in front of him. His expression was thoughtful, his eyes shadowed. No, I said quietly. I'm not. He nodded slowly. I believe you, he said. I should have said it sooner. Your father would have been proud of you, Evelyn. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. His words settled around me like a blessing, something old and steady and sure. That evening, we all gathered in the parlor, the fire crackling in the hearth. Malcolm sat in the corner, his face unreadable. Miranda perched beside him, her expression calm, but her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. I stood near the mantel, Daniel at my side. The lawyer was there too, her presence a quiet reminder that this was no longer just a family matter, it was something bigger. She cleared her throat and looked around the room. I want to be clear, she said. This is going to be a legal battle. There will be hearings, documents, challenges. It will take time. But in the end, the truth will win out. No one spoke. The silence felt like a living thing, heavy and expectant. Finally, Malcolm stood, his expression cold and remote. If you think this is over, he said softly, you're wrong. You've started something you can't finish, Evelyn. I met his gaze, my voice calm and clear. Maybe, but I'll see it through. All the way. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he turned and walked out, Miranda following close behind. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound final. As the room slowly emptied, Daniel squeezed my hand. You did it, he said. You stood up to him. It's not over, I said. But for the first time, I feel like I'm not fighting alone. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the dark ceiling. The weight of everything we'd started pressed down on me, but beneath it, there was something else, a quiet certainty, a flicker of hope. Because I knew now that the truth was stronger than any lie Malcolm could tell, and I knew that no matter how hard he fought, I would fight harder. The following days unfolded like a storm, sudden gusts of fury, uneasy silences, and the quiet, relentless drip of truth seeping into every corner of the estate. Malcolm kept to his wing of the house, but I could feel his presence everywhere, as if the walls themselves had absorbed his anger. At breakfast, he sat stiffly at the head of the table, his eyes flicking to me with cold calculation. Miranda, ever the loyal shadow, stayed close by his side. The rest of the family tried to pretend nothing had changed, but I could see it in their eyes, the questions, the doubts. I kept my head high, though my heart still pounded in my chest every time Malcolm spoke. Each word from him was a reminder of the battle we were waging, a battle that had shifted from whispered threats to open war. One afternoon, Kara called a meeting in the library. The estate lawyer was there, her calm voice steady as she explained the next steps. "The first hearing is scheduled for next week," she said. "We'll present the evidence, your father's letter, the forged documents, the buyer's testimony." "It's a strong case, Evelyn." I nodded, my fingers curling around the edge of my chair. "And Malcolm?" She hesitated. "He'll challenge it, of course. He's already hired his own team of lawyers. He'll try to bury you in paperwork and technicalities. But that doesn't change the facts." Daniel rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "We're ready for this," he said quietly. "He can't hide from the truth anymore." The lawyer gave me a small smile. "You're not alone, Evelyn. Remember that." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The fight ahead felt endless, a maze of courtrooms and legal jargon and family secrets that had been festering for years. But beneath the fear, there was something else, a steady, simmering determination. My father had trusted me with the cottage. He'd trusted me to protect it, and I wouldn't let him down. The next morning, I found Lena waiting for me in the garden. Her breath curled in the cold air as she pressed a folded note into my hand. "I found this in Mr. Malcolm's study," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I thought you should see it." I unfolded the note carefully. It was a letter to the buyer, proof that Malcolm had been planning the sale for months, even before Father's death. My heart pounded as I read the neat, impersonal words. "This is exactly what we need," I said, my voice low. "Thank you, Lena." She gave me a small smile. "I just want to help. You've always been kind to me, Miss Evelyn. I know what you're fighting for." As she slipped away, I tucked the letter safely into my pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. Later that day, I caught a glimpse of Malcolm in the hallway. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in my calm expression. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped closer, his voice low and almost gentle. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn," he said. This isn't how it was meant to be." I met his gaze unflinching. "This is exactly how it was meant to be," I said softly. "You can't bury the truth forever." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing as he turned and walked away. The days blurred together after that, long meetings with Kara and the lawyer, hushed conversations in the library, as we pieced together every last fragment of evidence. Daniel was always at my side, his quiet presence a steady source of strength. One evening, as we pored over another stack of papers, he looked up at me, his brow furrowed. "You're incredible, you know that," he said. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone fight like this." I felt a small smile tug at my lips. "I'm just tired of being afraid," I said softly. "Tired of letting Malcolm decide what I'm worth." "You're worth more than he'll ever understand," Daniel said, his voice fierce. "And you're not alone." His words warmed me, banishing the last traces of doubt from my heart. The night before the hearing, I found myself in the garden again. The moon hung low and bright, casting long shadows across the frosted grass. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling the quiet strength of the earth beneath my feet. I thought of my father, of the way he'd always believed in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. I thought of the cottage, the one place that had always felt like home. And I thought of Malcolm, his cold smile, and the lies he'd wrapped around us all like chains. But those chains were breaking now, and I would make sure they never held me again. As I turned to go back inside, Daniel appeared in the doorway, his expression soft. "You're ready," he said quietly. I nodded, the words settling deep in my chest. "I am," I said. "I'm ready to finish this." Because the truth wasn't just a weapon, it was a shield. And tomorrow, I would carry it into that courtroom and show them all who I really was. I was my father's daughter. I was the rightful heir to his legacy. And I was done being afraid. The morning of the hearing arrived cold, and still the winter sun casting long pale beams of light across the estate. I dressed with shaking hands, each button and fold a quiet act of defiance. This was it. The day I would stand in the light and refuse to be silenced. Daniel was waiting for me in the foyer, his expression calm, but his eyes bright with something fierce. "You're not alone," he said quietly, and I nodded, drawing strength from the simple truth of it. At the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Family members clustered in corners, voices low and worried. Malcolm stood apart from them, his expression smooth and unbothered. But I saw the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of something uncertain in his eyes. The hearing room was smaller than I expected, the wooden benches worn smooth by years of whispered confessions and quiet battles. I took my seat, the folder of documents resting heavy in my lap. Every breath felt like a promise to myself, I will not let him take this from me. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. She was an older woman, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. She listened carefully as Kara and the estate lawyer laid out the evidence, my father's letter, the forged documents, the testimony of the buyer Malcolm had tried to deceive. Malcolm's lawyer tried to argue his voice, calm and measured, but every word fell flat against the mountain of proof we had built. With each quiet sentence, the story of what had been done, the lies, the betrayals became clearer. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled as I rose. I looked out over the room at the faces that had watched this unfold from the shadows. Some were sympathetic, some were wary, but I didn't let that stop me. My father trusted me. I said softly, my voice gaining strength with every word. He trusted me with the one place that meant peace to him. Malcolm tried to take that from me, but I won't let him. I won't let his lies erase my father's wishes. Malcolm's eyes were on me, dark and steady, but I didn't flinch. I held his gaze and let him see that I was no longer the quiet girl he could push aside. When the judge finally spoke, her words fell like a stone into the stillness of the room. "The court recognizes the legitimacy of the documents presented by Miss Evelyn Hart," she said firmly. "The cottage and the trust fund remain hers, as intended by her father." I felt the breath rush from my lungs, relief flooding through me in a dizzying wave. Daniel's hand found mine, squeezing gently. I looked up and saw a small, proud smile on his face. Malcolm said nothing as he stood and left the room, his shoulders rigid, his expression a mask of calm. But I saw the defeat in the way he didn't look back. The spell was broken. The power he had held over me, over all of us, was gone. Back at the estate, the mood had shifted. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself had sighed in relief. Lena met me at the door, her eyes bright with joy. "You did it," she said softly. "You really did it." "We did it," I corrected gently, pulling her into a quick hug. "None of this would have been possible without you." In the days that followed, I walked through the halls of the estate and felt the quiet echo of a new beginning. The shadows that had clung to the walls were gone, replaced by something softer and more hopeful. I visited the lake cottage one morning, the water shimmering under the pale winter sun. Standing on the porch, I felt a peace settle in my chest, a sense of rightness of belonging. This was mine. Not because the court said so, but because I had claimed it for myself. My father's gift to me, my inheritance, my legacy. As I turned to leave, I saw Daniel waiting for me by the gate, his smile gentle, his eyes full of quiet pride. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I also knew I wasn't walking it alone. This battle had started with betrayal, but it ended with truth. And with that truth, I'd found a strength I never knew I had. I'd found my voice, and I'd found my place in the world. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the quietest voices can still win. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, hope, and the power of speaking up, because together we are never truly alone.